So in a video that I did earlier this week, I looked at the recent video from this month with Chris and Deb Stearns, where they were talking about what it was like for them as parents of that monster and how they were coping. And I did make the point that we can't blame them entirely for what their son did, although I did point out that they did enable him. But I wanted to highlight the struggle that it must be for them to be in those two worlds of he's still their son, but he did some horrible things. Now, I'm not giving them a free pass by any means, and I have a few videos that I want to look at where I discuss their relationship with their son or things to do with Stearns himself after Maddie went missing. But in this video, I wanted to discuss their claims that the TBI, the traumatic brain injury that he had, were the cause of what happened. And they used those specific words. They did say, we're looking into whether or not that was the cause. Now, the reason that I wanted to look at this video particularly, aside from the whole TBI issue, was to look at the progression of them trying to excuse their son. So, originally, early on in videos, we hear them trying to put it all back on Jen Soto, even to the point where in one of the prison emails, I think it was, Deb Stearns is telling her son that he shouldn't be taking the fall for someone else, essentially implying that Jen was responsible for Maddie's death and that he was innocent. And we have that interview that Christopher Stearns requested with the police department in July of this year, where he tried to put it all back on Jen again. And he started it out with, I'm surprised that Jen hasn't been arrested yet. And then he tried to put all the blame back on Jen and try and deflect from what happened in terms of, well, you should be looking at Jen, she is just as culpable. And so there was some level of, from the beginning to that point, they had maybe eased off a bit and were accepting that he was, at least partially responsible in their eyes, but they were still trying to pin it on Jen. And I think it was during one of the early interviews that Deb Stearns brought up the traumatic brain injury and tried to say that, we have to feel sorry for him for that and we have to excuse his actions because of that, essentially. And then in this more recent video, so the interview that she did on YouTube in September of this year, she brought up the TBI again. But the way that they spoke about it had me listening more closely and had me commenting a few things and asking a few questions. So I'm going to play that audio first, and then I'm going to discuss why I believe that, first of all, the discussion of the TBI and them trying to say that's the reason he did it is simply a progression from them trying to deflect earlier on, and where they were basically told in no uncertain terms by law enforcement, we've got nothing on Jen Soto, back off, essentially you barking up the wrong tree. So from that, they're now pushing for the TBI defence. And they mentioned that in one of their interviews, they've mentioned that they had spoken to Stearns' lawyer about following up medical records from this incident from when he was 7 years old. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here. So let's listen to the audio from this most recent interview first.
Well, we know we're not the cause of it. We're trying to pursue a conversation about an accident Stefan had 30 years ago as the possibility of causing this TBI. 30 years ago when Stefan had this accident, and just so the public can know what that consisted of, Stefan was literally run over by a pickup truck twice. He and a friend were playing in a parking area when he was 7 or 8 years old. The guy came out to his truck, a small Toyota pickup truck. "Hey guys, how you doing?" Gets in the truck and immediately backs over them. Pushes Stefan down into a bit of a hole in the parking lot. Drove right over him and hit him in the head with the bumper as he backed up the first time, and then if that wasn't enough, he pulled forward and ran over him again. The fact that Stefan isn't...
They hit him in the back of the head first, and then when Stefan raised up to look, he heard the kid screaming. He quickly put it in gear and drove forward and hit him in the front, and then came up over his body, up over his pelvis area.
The fact that he wasn't permanently disabled and wheelchair bound is a miracle.
Thank the mud.
But there wasn't, when he was released from the hospital, the doctor said, "Hey, be cognizant of any difference in his attitude and his demeanor and such." And we pressed for more information, and we just told that he could have some headaches, dizziness, nausea, sensitivity to light and stuff, may not be able to wake up or go to sleep. And there could be some other physical traits. He developed a tic for a while, and he outgrew that. He did suffer
PTSD.
From PTSD and also separation anxiety. But we just never knew what to expect, but they just told us to be on the lookout for things. And what we did find is that his personality changed. He changed 180 degrees. He was a high energy kid, full of love, laughter, and such, and to something totally different.
The troglodyte.
So, on the surface, the incident itself sounds kind of serious. When they talk about him being run over twice and hit on the front of the head and hit on the back of the head. But if we break it down and listen to what they're really saying, when the vehicle hit him, it pushed him into a hole. So when they say, and it drove over the top of him, they've just said he was in a hole. So it didn't actually physically drive over the top of him, like have contact with him, but drove over the hole that he was in, right? And then they're like, and then they pulled forward and ran over him again. Presumably he was still in the hole. Now, Deb claims that he was hit on the front of the head and then he was hit on the back of the head by the bumper. And they say, well, thank goodness he was not permanently disabled. And you hear Deb, under her breath, say, "Thank the mud." So the only injuries he actually had was from bumping his head on the car. Sounds like he landed in mud. So there wasn't an additional injury from hitting the ground. And it sounds like the vehicle wasn't going very fast because obviously the vehicle was just starting to reverse. So while they make it sound like a big thing, when you break it down like that, you realise that all it is this vehicle knocked him over. It wasn't a full-on vehicle was going at a high speed and sent him flying and caused major injuries. No, it knocked him over and it shook his skull a bit, basically. And what they've described in terms of what the doctor said to them, is classic concussion. It's not traumatic brain injury. It's not a long-term injury. They said the doctor said to him when he was discharged, he said, just, watch his demeanour. Keep an eye on him, basically. And watch for headaches, dizziness, nausea, sensitivity to light, and he may not be able to wake up. All those things are classic signs of concussion. When someone has a concussion, you're told when you take them home that you shouldn't let them sleep because you need to keep an eye on them, basically. And that's what they've been told. So they're trying to claim here that something that sounds very much like a simple concussion is more than what it is. Maybe I sound harsh here, but let me go further on this. They do claim that his personality changed and he became more aggressive. This is a 7-year-old child. Maybe that is the case, and maybe that is a consequence of a brain injury. We can't say 100% for certain that that is not. But also, we know how much they mollycoddle him. And she talks about him having PTSD and separation anxiety as a result of it. So it's quite possible that the anger that they saw in him could have been a response to that. Like I said, it still could have been a response, like an actual injury. But when you listen to the way the doctors talk, they say that the doctors spoke to them, it does sound like a simple concussion. Now, there's only their account of him becoming more angry, etc., after this incident. We have no records here to back any of these claims up. They've essentially said that the doctor said these things to them and then dismissed them, and then there was nothing else more that was done for him. So essentially they're saying that over the past 30 years, they never followed up on this supposed TBI. So does that mean they never saw any signs that made them consider that maybe it was more than just a concussion? And now they're just grasping at it as an excuse? They have admitted that as an adult he has a short fuse. And we've heard that from a few sources. People can have a short fuse without having a TBI. And let's be honest, he's been enabled his whole life. When you listen to the way they talk about him, you can see that his parents have enabled him. They basically let him get his own way. And when you let children and adults get their own way, when things don't go their own way, they do have a short fuse because that's not what they're accustomed to. So you cannot say with any certainty that this anger issue that he has comes from a TBI. Where is the consecutive medical records over the past 30 years? By their own accounts, there's none. There is a single record of him having been knocked down by a vehicle, received a concussion, and received no further treatment over a 30-year period. Where is the documentation of him having ongoing issues with the law because of a TBI, because of anger issues and violence? Yeah, there was an incident with him stabbing some guy. And that's another interesting one that I will look at another time, because it sounds like he was being a twat and this guy got jack of him, went at him, and then he pulled a knife. But that is one incident in 30 years that we are aware of. He certainly doesn't have a police record for violence. We don't hear anything about him being suspended from school for violence. We don't hear anything from previous girlfriends about him being violent with them. So there is no established pattern here that would point to an ongoing problem with TBI. You have a single incident from 30 years ago and nothing since. And now they're claiming that this is the reason that he did what he did to Maddie. Now, he's on 2 separate lots of charges here as well. Why is that significant with regards to a TBI? Because the stuff to do with the images, that is planned, calculated stuff. Stuff where he had to rationalise it. Whereas, presumably, from what we do know, what he finally did with Maddie seems to have been him snapping, losing his temper. We even hear the account from his parents when they talk about him going for a walk to cool down and coming back and discovering that she was cold. That right there is an admission, firstly, of his guilt, but also of him having acted in anger. And the thing is, anger, any sort of emotion control, is the frontal cortex of the brain. It is a different part of the brain that controls emotions as opposed to the part of the brain that is calculating enough to take photos of a 12-year-old girl or to take advantage to groom a 12-year-old girl. You're talking about 2 different parts of the brain that are working on 2 separate crimes. So are they claiming that just conveniently both those particular regions of the brain happen to have been where he sustained a TBI? Now, I'm no expert on TBI, that's for sure. But to me, the major thing here is that you are talking about 2 separate crimes that, when you look at neurofunction, different parts of the brain controlled what happened with those 2 separate crimes. When you talk about a TBI, it is usually an instance of one area of the brain having been affected. Quite often it is the frontal lobe, the frontal cortex, the area that controls emotions, the area that stops someone from becoming angry really quickly. So, while we perhaps can't turn around and say with 100% certainty that, well, this is because of TBI that he lost his cool and he became angry, what we can say is that there is no documented record of him having a lifelong struggle with a TBI. He has never been diagnosed with a TBI. He was sent home with a concussion, and by their own accounts, they never followed up on it. So to then claim that this is the reason why things happened, I think it would be a very, very poor prosecutor who would not be able to argue against a claim for leniency resulting from a TBI when there is no document trail to prove that he ever had a TBI. Anecdotes are different from solid documented evidence. Thanks for watching. If you're new, please subscribe to my channel, hit the like button and leave a comment below. What do you think about this TBI idea as a defence?